Hi everybody, welcome to Introduction to Chemical Dependency from my mom's living room. My mom, thank God, is in Florida, and so my wife and I don't drive each other crazy. I do my work from my mom's house, which is only a few blocks away. And it's kind of appropriate that I be at mom's house today because we're going to talk about family issues. I was reviewing the book for this week, and it's interesting because the book talks a lot about society. We had a section on the media. Just recently, there was an alcohol chapter, and then marijuana and tobacco and into stimulants and things like that. And those are all very, very important. And there'll be plenty of stuff on your exam about that. But I noticed the book doesn't talk about family and the role of family when it comes to addiction, which is kind of surprising because what we have talked about is the whole idea that if your family has a history of addiction, you're far more likely to develop a problem with addiction yourself. And so we really would be remiss if we didn't talk about family issues. So I want you to think about a few things. First of all, there's the whole idea within families of a multi-generational approach. And there's a thing called a genogram. And I will attach some reading material about genograms along this email that I want you to read. But if you think about it, think of a family tree. And if you look at your family tree, you can look at patterns throughout your family's history going back many, many generations. I don't know if you read the Times-Union, but I was actually quoted on Sunday because my grandfather, Cornelius Schreck, died of the flu pandemic in 1919. 1919. So he was 24 years old, and my father was just a couple of months old. And so isn't it interesting how life repeats itself? But if we look at multi-generations, think about your own family. Thinking about your mom, your dad, and their parents, and their parents. And what goes through the family? Is there a history of physical illnesses? Is there a history of diabetes or sickle cell or anything else in terms of medical history? And think of that impact on a family. Is there any history of psychiatric problems or mental illness? And what you'll find is that when we go further into history, people talk less and less about that. In fact, the whole thrust of the article about the pandemic in 1919 was no one ever talked about it. About 500 people died in Albany from it, and it's kind of a gap in history. People didn't talk about it. If you look at your family history, what seeps out? What goes on from generation to generation? Is there a history of addiction? Is there a history of criminal activity? Is there a history of psychiatric problems? And then look at the impact of that for the spouse of the person, the children of the person, and look how it reverberates through the entire family system. Because that's exactly what we want to refer to, is that the family is a system. And anything that affects any part of that system affects the whole part. It's kind of like one of those mobiles that hang from a ceiling. And if you touch any part of it, the whole thing vibrates or moves along. And so think about the family as a system. Thinking about your own family. What goes on throughout the whole family? What was the family involved in? What does a family value? Think about that for a second. What does your family value? Does your family value money, education, a good time, perfectionism? There are positive things that a family can value, and there's not so positive things that a family can value. What's the family's perspective on the family rules? And I want you to think about something for a second. If I asked you, where in your house is the screwdriver kept? Or the scissors? Now, I'm at my mom's house. I could take this camera and show you. It's in the middle drawer in the kitchen. That's kind of a family rule. It's not in a particularly important family rule, and it's not written down anyplace. But it is a family rule. That's where the scissors, that's where the screwdriver goes, right? So that's unspoken. Right? And think of how many things like that are family rules. When did you have to be home at night? Did you have to go to dinner? And there are basic rules like that. And then take a step back from that and start to think about what are the emotional rules that go on. Are you allowed to express emotion? Who in the family can express anger? Can everyone? Or just dad? Or just mom? Or just mom and dad at each other? And do they do it in front of kids? If you're a frustrated child and you get angry, are you allowed to express that, or are you told to behave? How is sadness handled? Are you allowed to be sad? Are you told to knock it off? Or I'll give you something to cry about, or something like that. Those rules seep into our lives. And it goes on. We often carry them with us for our whole lives into adulthood. Think about relationships. What do we learn in our family about how we pair up, about intimacy, about sex? Do we come from a family where sex was talked about? Do we come from a family where it was never talked about or shameful? Do we have a family that has secrets when it comes to sexuality? And what does that look like? What does that feel like? Were people from the neighborhood come into the home? Or was the home just for the family? And were there secrets that were supposed to be kept by the family? And one of the things that we look at in terms of families, in terms of function and health and things like that, is what kind of secrets did a family have? Was there something shameful that went on in the family that was kept in the family? Was there addiction? Was there alcoholism? Was there violence? Was there psychiatric problems? Was there health problems? Right? And when those things go on, and a child is encouraged subtly or maybe even directly to keep a secret, what does that do? Where does that go? And when you grow up, what happens to that experience? Right? See, there's rules in the family, and sometimes rules are good. It's nice to know where the scissors are. It's good to know what a child knows what the expectation of what time they should be home. But if the other rules are don't talk, don't feel, don't listen, don't express, that can hurt not only a child, but can create issues that go on in somebody's life and affect the way they grow up. So it's an important thing to think of. If you look at the psychologist that's often talked about in Intro to Psychology, Erik Erikson, he talks about how people develop, and they develop by resolving conflicts, like autonomy versus shame and doubt. I don't know if that sounds familiar. Or initiative and industry versus shame, and things like that. And what we find out is that as someone develops and is allowed to express themselves and grow, they resolve the conflicts that shape their personality more positively. If you're shut down as a kid, then your personality doesn't develop quite as robustly, things like that. And then what happens as you grow up, when it's time to pair up and develop true intimacy with a partner, that's often difficult because you didn't have the foundation for that. Okay, so there's rules in a family. There's also roles in a family. I've probably have heard the idea of hero, scapegoat, lost child, and family mascot, and that in households, especially in dysfunctional households, people form the children form those roles. Well, what's bad about that? Well, probably nothing, and probably in most families there are different roles that people take, right? And it's okay when those roles are flexible and you have a chance to to move in and out. Sometimes you can be the hero, sometimes you become a mascot. But in a dysfunctional family, people get solidified into a single role. And when that role is so rigid, it's dysfunctional. What am I talking about? Well, if you're a family hero, suppose you're the captain of the football team, you're number one in your class, you're a great volunteer, everybody sees you as a super kid. The family may rely on that role to take the attention away from the dysfunction that's going on. So that kid who has to excel at everything has the weight of the family on his or her shoulders. What happens to that kid when they grow up? No, they're perfectionists. They do something wrong, they think it's an absolute disaster. What about the scapegoat in the family? That's the kid that's getting in trouble, throwing desks through the window, beating up the teacher. Well, that role allows the family to say, geez, if it wasn't for that scapegoat, this family would be okay. That's the problem, is that kid. And then when that guy grows up, he's spent his whole life getting negative attention and finding a way to screw things up. Right? A mascot takes the attention away from the dysfunction by making everybody laugh or by being cute and saves the family that way. Problem is, maybe that kid grows up and needs constant attention, needs people laughing at him, and is never taken seriously. And then there's the lost child in the set of rules, and the lost child is the one who slinks away to his or her bedroom, puts on the headphones, and just avoids. And what happens to that person when they grow up? Okay, do they have any relationships at all? Do they kind of blend out of society? Okay, so the whole idea of roles and families isn't a hard science. It's a framework to look at things. But when it comes to addiction, it's very, very important to look at the family. You've heard the term enabling. Enabling means when a family member doesn't allow the addict in their life to feel the full consequences of their behavior. So we'll talk more about that in an upcoming mini lecture. But right now, what I want you to do is I want you to write a reaction to this lecture. Send it on in. We'll have a little bit of a discussion, comment on each other's discussion points. Hit reply all so everybody gets our discussion points, right? Complete the questions that I sent along. Do your chapter summaries as you've continued to do, and watch the video, the other videos that I've posted and other reading material. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening in.